The hall was modest in size, with faded beige walls and a few small windows that let in the afternoon sunlight. Old wooden chairs lined the floor, slightly uneven, some squeaking when people shifted their weight. The air carried a mix of anticipation, chatter, and the faint scent of polish from the worn wooden floor. This was a local music gathering, a place where anyone with a piano story could come and play. Where some hoped to impress, others came to learn, and a few came just to observe and judge. The room had a curious energy that day. Not overtly tense, but quiet tension lingered beneath the casual smiles and polite nods. People whispered to each other, sharing opinions softly, as if measuring everyone's skill before they had even started playing. The kind of subtle judgment that wasn't cruel, but still sharp enough to be felt. At the front of the room stood the piano, a slightly worn instrument with scratches along its edges and a few keys that had lost their smoothness. Despite its imperfections, it held a strong presence, commanding attention even before anyone played it. It was a piano that had heard countless stories, though no one would know what it had witnessed over the years. The wood seemed to hum with quiet pride, waiting for someone who could speak through its keys. One by one, participants had already taken their turns. Most walked up confidently, sat down, and played pieces they had practiced many times before. Some received polite applause, others a little more enthusiastic, depending on how well they performed. A few mistakes here and there didn't matter to the audience. They had expected some imperfection. Yet, each person carried an air of confidence and natural. Some rehearsed. Near the back of the room, she stood quietly. She had arrived late, slipping in while another participant was finishing their piece. She took a seat near the wall, hoping not to draw attention. Her clothes were simple, nothing flashy or attention-grabbing. Her hair was tied back neatly, her posture straight but slightly tense. She folded her hands in her lap, eyes lowered, and listened intently. She did not speak, did not fidget, did not seek approval. Her presence was quiet, almost invisible, but her mind was sharply alert. As she listened, she noticed things most people would miss. The small mistakes, the uneven timing, the rushed notes, and the pauses that didn't feel natural. She recognized confidence that masked insecurity and insecurity that masked talent. Music was not new to her. It had been part of her life for years, even if no one in the room could see that. For her, music had always been private. It was a world away from judgment, a place where she could express herself freely. Most of her practice had happened at home, alone, with only the soft hum of her imagination as company. It was not about being seen or applauded, it was about feeling. About breathing through the keys and letting every note carry what words could not. When the previous player finished and stood up, a light round of applause echoed through the room. The organizer, a kind but firm woman with a clipboard in hand, glanced around and asked if anyone else wanted to play. A few heads shifted, some people murmured quietly to each other, but no one moved immediately. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she raised her hand. Several eyes turned toward her. Surprise flashed across a few faces, curiosity in others. A couple of people exchanged glances, silently questioning her choice. She took a deep breath, standing up carefully and beginning to walk toward the piano. Her steps were deliberate, slow, not out of fear, but out of focus. As she moved forward, soft laughter floated from one side of the room. It wasn't loud, not openly mocking, but it was noticeable. Someone whispered under their breath, and another person chuckled quietly. A man near the front leaned slightly toward his neighbor, smirking, clearly confident in what he expected would happen. She heard it all. Every whisper, every quiet laugh, every breath that carried doubt. For a moment, her chest tightened, not with anger, but with the familiar sting of judgment. She had felt it many times before, though not always in music. The feeling of being underestimated, of being seen as someone who didn't belong. The feeling of being measured against others. Before she had even played a single note, she reached the piano and paused for a moment, taking in the instrument as if greeting an old friend. The bench was firm beneath her as she adjusted her position, making sure she was comfortable. She placed her hands gently in her lap, her breathing steady. She didn't rush, because she had learned long ago that rushing only made things worse. The soft murmurs of the audience continued. Chairs creaked, someone cleared their throat, a few still smiled quietly, expecting a weak performance. No one spoke directly to her, but the silent judgment was clear. They didn't expect much. She looked down at the keys. They reminded her of the very first piano she had ever touched. It had been in a small, dimly lit room, tucked away near a wall where sunlight barely reached. That piano had been old, slightly out of tune, and each key had its own personality, some stiff, some soft, some reluctant to sound at all. But to her, it was perfect. She had discovered it by chance years ago. At first, she hadn't known how to sit properly, how to place her hands. She had pressed the keys slowly, learning the sound before learning the rules. Every note taught her something new. There had been no teachers, no formal guidance, no correcting hands to steer her. She had learned by listening, by repeating, by failing and trying again. Some nights her fingers ached. Some nights she doubted herself. But the piano became a place of refuge, a place to speak when words failed her, a place that never judged, never laughed. Back in the hall, she lifted her hands above the keys. Her fingers hovered there, relaxed but ready. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't look at the man who had laughed quietly. She focused entirely on the piano. The laughter in the room hadn't completely stopped. A few people whispered again. The man near the front leaned back, arms crossed, his expression a mixture of confidence and doubt. She stayed still, her breathing slowed. The world outside the piano faded. The keys felt familiar beneath her fingers, like a language her hands had spoken for years, even if no one else had understood. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She wasn't in the hall anymore. She was back in that small, quiet room where music had first taught her patience and resilience. There were no eyes watching her, no judgments pressing down, no laughter to pierce her confidence. She opened her eyes. The room had grown a little quieter. People leaned forward slightly, curious, some already losing interest, assuming they knew how this would go. A few were on the edge of distraction, convinced they would not be impressed. She adjusted her fingers one last time. Her heart beat steadily, not fast, not slow. She had felt nerves many times before, but this was different. Calm, deep, quiet. A calm that only comes when you stop worrying about what others think and remember why you are here in the first place. She lowered her finger toward the key. The first note was about to be played. Time seemed to stretch. Chairs creaked. A soft cough broke the tense silence. Eyes turned instinctively toward the piano. Even the man who had smirked earlier leaned forward slightly, curiosity replacing doubt. The room waited, holding its collective breath. Her fingers touched the keys lightly, almost reverently. The sound that came out was not just a note. It was a statement, a whisper of years of unseen effort, practice in solitude, and resilience in the face of judgment. It carried a quiet honesty that could not be faked, could not be rehearsed. A few people exchanged surprised glances. Some eyebrows lifted, some mouths parted slightly, unsure what they had just heard. The soft laughter had vanished completely, replaced by an almost electric silence. Everyone was listening now, in a way they hadn't expected to. She continued. Each note followed the other with intention. She didn't rush. She didn't overplay. Every sound was deliberate, every pause measured. Her body moved naturally, guided by muscle memory and emotion rather than force or ego. For the first time that day, the room was silent, not the polite silence of waiting, but the focused silence of genuine attention. The man who had smirked moments ago now sat forward, hands unclasped, eyes fixed on her hands. He did not smile. His head tilted slightly as if trying to understand how someone who seemed so small, so unassuming, could create such sound. She was unaware of their attention. She was in the moment, connected to the piano, to the music that had shaped her life. She let the room fade entirely. Let the past and the present converge in every note she played. Every observer, without realizing it, was witnessing years of perseverance distilled into this one performance. The laughter had disappeared, replaced by quiet admiration, by curiosity, by the dawning realization that talent is often hidden behind Humility. Her heart beat steadily. Calm, confident, connected, not still, she played. The moment the first note left the piano, the room changed. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The soft laughter, the whispers, the smirks, they all vanished in an instant. Chairs stopped creaking, people stopped shifting, and even the air seemed to pause, as if waiting for what would come next. The sound was clear and precise, yet full of feeling. It wasn't the loud, showy kind of playing that demanded attention. It was quiet, yet impossible to ignore. It carried with it years of unseen practice, of patience, of private victories that no one had applauded. It carried a story in itself, one that words could never tell. The man near the front, who had smirked only moments ago, leaned forward instinctively. His arms uncrossed and his confident posture softened. There was surprise in his eyes, then curiosity, then something else, a recognition. Recognition that what he had judged in a few seconds was far from the truth. Her fingers moved lightly across the keys, each note deliberate, each pause measured. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to impress. She was telling a story, one that only she fully understood, yet the room felt its weight. There was emotion in every sound, the kind of emotion that doesn't scream, but seeps into you, making you pay attention whether you want to or not. At first, the audience didn't react. Some sat frozen in disbelief. Others leaned forward, their eyes widening, mouths slightly open, as if they were trying to process what they were hearing. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats, not because they didn't like it, but because no one had expected something so real, so honest. She didn't notice. She wasn't thinking about the audience. She was entirely in the moment, in the music, in the flow of the notes. Years of practice, quiet nights, mistakes, corrections, and perseverance had led her to this single point in time. With each chord, she poured in everything she had learned from solitude. Every small victory, every failure, every late night spent practicing when no one was watching, it was all there. Translated into sound, the man who had laughed now sat completely still, leaning slightly toward the piano. His hands rested loosely on his knees. He watched, almost hypnotized, as her fingers danced over the keys with a precision and grace that seemed impossible for someone so unassuming. He couldn't look away. The room itself seemed to shift with every note. The energy that had been quiet judgment transformed into quiet awe. People stopped whispering. They stopped looking around. Their focus had been claimed by the music. She played a melody that rose and fell gently, not with theatrical flair, but with careful attention to each moment. It was music that spoke of resilience, of quiet confidence, of a story told without words. Her body moved naturally, responding to the rhythm she felt, not the expectations around her. One by one, the audience began to lean in. Some eyes glistened. Some hands unconsciously clutched at chairs, holding themselves still. Even those who had laughed or doubted her found themselves captivated, drawn into the emotion carried by her fingers. A young girl near the back, who had been quietly doodling on a notepad, stopped mid-sketch. Her eyes were fixed on the piano. She seemed to recognize something familiar in the way the notes flowed, a reflection of her own hidden passion and the fear of judgment she had carried. The applause from the earlier performers, polite and brief, seemed distant now. It was replaced by something different, a silent recognition that they were witnessing more than music. They were witnessing a human story, one that had unfolded quietly, privately. Until this exact moment, the man who had initially smirked could no longer hide his amazement. He had heard many talented players, people trained from a young age, people with certificates and accolades. And yet, here was someone who had learned on her own, someone who had faced doubt countless times, yet whose fingers now commanded the keys with unmatched poise. His eyes softened. He leaned slightly forward, as if to capture every movement, every subtle touch, every nuanced sound. His earlier judgment had been replaced with admiration, tinged with humility. He understood now that the appearance of confidence meant little. What mattered was the story behind the performance. Around the room, the transformation continued. People who had been distracted, restless, or judgmental were now completely absorbed. The quiet, the tension, the disbelief all melted into attentive silence. It was as if the music had created its own gravity, drawing every gaze, every thought, every heartbeat toward the piano. Her hands continued their work. The melody grew richer, more complex, but never forced. It flowed naturally, like a conversation rather than a lecture, like a whisper that demanded to be heard. The notes carried the weight of all the nights she had spent alone, practicing tirelessly, feeling the keys beneath her fingers, learning from mistakes and finding her own rhythm. Even the children in the audience, who had been fidgeting, looked on with wide eyes. There was a sense of wonder in their expressions, a recognition that something rare and genuine was happening. They sensed the dedication, the emotion, the honesty. It wasn't about perfection. It was about authenticity. As the piece progressed, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. No one dared to interrupt. Even the softest cough was swallowed back into silence. Every listener had become part of the performance, caught in the invisible thread that connected the player, the piano, and the story embedded in each note. She was aware of none of this. She wasn't trying to impress. She wasn't trying to correct anyone's assumptions. She was simply living the music, letting it flow through her. Every chord, every pause, every delicate transition was a reflection of her journey, a journey of resilience, patience, and unwavering passion. Finally, as the last note resonated through the hall, the room remained silent for a heartbeat longer. It was not an awkward silence. It was a silence of awe, a silence of recognition, a silence that acknowledged the depth of what had just been witnessed. Then came the applause. It started softly, hesitant at first, as if people were testing the boundaries of their own reaction. Slowly, the clapping grew louder, more confident. Hands patted chairs, some people stood up, others clapped over their mouths in disbelief. The sound filled the hall, bouncing off the walls, echoing through every corner. The man near the front finally straightened fully. His expression had changed entirely. The smirk was gone, replaced with respect. He nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, acknowledging that he had been wrong to judge. For a moment, words weren't necessary. His eyes conveyed admiration, understanding, and perhaps a hint of humility. She rose from the piano bench, not hurriedly, not triumphantly, but calmly. She looked around the room. Faces that had once doubted her now reflected amazement. Eyes that had expected failure now held respect. She didn't speak immediately. She didn't need to. The music had said everything, and the audience had understood. Some whispered among themselves, exchanging looks of astonishment. "Did you hear that?" one person asked quietly. Another nodded, unable to find words to describe what they had experienced. Even those who had been quietly skeptical before now seemed to recognize the truth. Talent, dedication, and passion often go unnoticed until the right moment reveals them fully. The young girl near the back, inspired and moved, could barely contain her excitement. She whispered to her friend, "I want to practice like that. Someday I want to be that brave." It was clear that the performance had not only affected the present audience, but had also planted a seed of inspiration. A reminder of what perseverance and dedication could achieve. The piano, worn and aged, seemed to hum in quiet satisfaction. It had shared its voice with someone who understood it, who respected it, and who could make it speak the language it had waited years to tell. As the applause continued, the man who had laughed quietly before approached her. He didn't speak immediately. He simply extended a hand, a gesture of acknowledgement. She shook it lightly, a small smile on her face. There were no words needed. Respect had been earned through action, through dedication, through music. The room gradually settled. People began to leave, talking quietly about the performance they had just witnessed. The whispers carried admiration, awe, and a sense of humility. Many carried with them a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that judging someone too quickly can rob you of witnessing something extraordinary. She lingered by the piano for a moment longer, her hands resting gently on the keys. She thought of all the nights she had spent practicing alone, the challenges she had faced, the doubts she had overcome. It had all led to this moment, not to impress, not to prove, but to simply express, to share. and to connect through music. As she finally walked away from the piano, her heart was steady, calm, fulfilled. The room had been changed, even if just slightly, by her performance. And she too had been transformed not by the applause, not by recognition, but by the realization that dedication and passion quietly nurtured can speak louder than judgment ever could. That day, the room learned a lesson they would not forget. Never underestimate someone based on appearance or expectation. Talent can be hidden, passion can be quiet, and courage can reside in the most unassuming forms. And for her, it was a reminder that true music does not seek validation. It only seeks honesty, expression, and the courage to let the world hear it, even if the world laughs at first.